I don't even want to know their names because it's not personal. You have a huge hole in your something about Abraham Joshua Heschel before you finish, because he was Jewish, right? But probably one of the most important American theologians, not just Jewish theologians, but theologians. And a lot of Christian seminaries teach Heschel, right? So he, like, I think of Tillich, Paul Tillich. Does that name ring a bell in the Christian theological circles?
So we discussed a guy, and I don't remember his name.
But Randy, but not the guy who does Toy Story.
Yeah, I was going to say the musician. So definitely ask about Paul Tillich and Abraham Joshua Heschel. One of the things that Rabbi Heschel is known for in the Christian world is this work, which is called the Prophets, right? It's about the biblical prophets. So there's a copy of that too if you want. And then this one it's obviously a short booklet, and it's called Exploring Judaism as an Adult, right? So I thought that might be interesting and a short read. All right, fire away.
All right, just spitfire. So I'm going to give you a rough outline just so that you can kind of know like the direction that we're headed.
Yeah.
So the outline is God, man, Christ response. Just like a typical like gospel understanding of it, so that we can kind of take our Christian understanding and understand your faith. And then this is by no means the expectations of us coming forth and like this isn't an evangelistic encounter from us. This is us trying to like genuinely understand your faith. So if at any point we sound like we're preaching, you can just tell us. But yeah, so it's going to be mainly you explaining the religion and then just seeing like what you kind of think of these questions and
Sure.
From your Jewish background and what you how you interpret them.
Yeah.
Mainly being like Isaiah 53 and what you think of the Messiah. But obviously like God, who is God? What is he like? What do you all believe about him? Man. What do you consider as naturally good and evil? Christ, what do you view of the Messiah? And then response, how would one convert to Judaism? Those are just a few of the questions. But to start us out, we were kind of studying the different sections of Judaism. So do you just mind giving us a brief explanation?
When you
of
say
each
different
side?
section, what do you
Like, so I know that we studied Reform Judaism,
Okay.
Conservative Judaism, and Orthodox Judaism.
Okay.
Do you mind just giving us a brief overview of which side you come from?
Well, so I grew up conservative.
Okay.
Okay. And I don't know who gave you the overviews of Reform, Orthodox, and Conservative, but if it at all was a linear overview, which is kind of how we grew up. I was born and raised here in Kansas City. So, and then went West Coast for undergraduate, East Coast for graduate, and I moved to Israel. Lived in Israel for 12 years, and then came back here in 2006 because my dad was sick. So we grew up with a linear understanding, which is basically that Reform is over here, we're in the middle, and Orthodox is over here. So they're less religious, they're more religious, and we're in the middle. Inaccurate, unhelpful, right? Scratch that. I think the best way to explain it is kind of like 4 quadrants. We've got an x-axis and a y-axis, right? And on the x-axis is tradition and change, which I think Christians can well relate to, because that is a certain way of looking at the Christian world. You lean more into tradition or more into change, and it's a spectrum, right? So it's not like we don't want any change, we're only tradition, or we're only change, no tradition. It's kind of how you balance those two. So that's on the one hand. On the other hand, the y-axis would be authority and autonomy. And in the Jewish world, what that means is if you have a question, the authority is you're going to go ask a rabbi. The rabbi is going to give you the answer. That's the answer. It's not kind of, well, now you come up with your own answer. Okay? So when you look at these 4 quadrants, you basically have, in general, Reform kind of down here in this quadrant, because they're going to lean more into, wherever tradition and change goes, but they're going to lean more into change and much more into autonomy. There are rabbis, all those 3 that you mentioned, and all of Judaism today. Take a step back, for example, and talk about after, let's say from the year zero, and that's where we start what we call CE, the Common Era, as opposed to BCE, before zero, before the Common Era. So when you talk about the Common Era moving forward, you have Rabbinic Judaism, right? But before that, you have what might be familiar with you, the Sadducees, Pharisees, the Essenes. But when you're talking about, and I don't know if this is clear to you guys or not, when you're talking about Reform, Conservative, and Orthodox, all that is Rabbinic Judaism. Okay, so there could certainly be differences among them, but at the same time, right, none of this is Sadducees. None of this is Essenes. So kind of what won out, or what has lasted in terms of the Jewish people and Jewish tradition at this point in time, is Rabbinic Judaism.
So it's just like where they fall on keeping tradition, or where they lack in keeping tradition, or where they are more like
It's remind me of you?
Cody.
Cody. So Caden, Cody, and Michael. So it's not so much, yes, in general, but I would say it a little bit differently in the sense that where change is gonna be allowed much more, right? And so tradition is gonna have, let's say this way, sometimes you might hear it this way, that Jewish tradition has a vote, but not a veto. Whereas in a more Orthodox context, it's gonna have the veto.
Yeah.
Right? So if you look inside of Orthodoxy, tell this often to Jewish people, there is as much diversity within Orthodoxy as there is among the different denominations. Thank you. So, any one of these we say has within them a lot of variance. But if Reform's over here, so Orthodox is over here, they're going to lean more into tradition and more into the authority of the rabbi. And then Conservative likes to think of ourselves as we're the perfect balance in the middle. Of course, that never exists. But that's the idea, is that you're balancing tradition and change, and the rabbi is the authority figure, but, and this is true of all rabbis, they teach. So the idea is not that they're the only ones who know anything. Right? We're teaching about Torah, we want people to understand. But nonetheless, there is this difference in role of deciding when issues of Jewish law or Jewish practice come up, that the rabbi, depending on what rabbi you're asking, would decide that.
Okay. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, that definitely helps a lot. I know our textbook kind of laid out that template that you said. They've Reformed over here, Orthodox, and then Conservative somewhere in the middle. So that definitely sheds lights on kind of like the big overview of how big Judaism is.
Yeah. And I think another kind of biblical perspective on this would be that 12 tribes, one people. So you always have that tension between like, well, we don't do things the way you do. And then, okay, fine, we respect, but where are we leaning too much into the individual tribes and forgetting that we're one people?
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, that helps out a lot. And then the next one, I think we can go ahead and jump into like the four main sections. First being God. So like in your personal beliefs, who is God? Speaking directly to his role in our lives, if he's after like a personal relationship with us, but also what is his ultimate plan for people? So what is what is his role in our lives, and then what is his ultimate plan for us?
So I would say that from a Jewish perspective, the way we know and understand God is through the Torah. Having said that, there are a lot of different perspectives, right? So, it's kind of like, and without knowing where any of you or all of you are with respect to this, but, you kind of see a bumper sticker that says the Bible said, Jesus said it, the Bible shows it, that's it, period. But of course that's not it, period, because different people have different interpretations of the same passage from the same Bible. So, so that's very much true in Jewish life, right? So you got different perspectives. One rabbinic tradition teaches that there are 70 faces to the Torah, right? So you kind of look at it from different perspectives, you see different things. But so that's the way we get to know God. Rabbi Heschel, by the way, if you look at and Google Rabbi Heschel and see his books, one of them, for example, is God in Search of Man. Okay, that was a bit radical, right? Not that that had never come up before, but he brought that in the 20th century, and especially here in American Jewish life. He was escaping the Holocaust and came to teach here, first in the Reform movement. He came from a Hasidic Jewish background, which is basically Orthodox in general, and ended up at the conservative seminary, which is called the Jewish Theological Seminary of America in New York City, which is right across from Union Theological Seminary, which is where Paul Tillich was. And Paul Tillich was kind of peers and friends with Martin Buber. And so when we're talking about a particular approach of theology, both Christian and Jewish, that sees God as very interested and concerned about relationship with human beings. So, and then you kind of grapple with all the different stories in the Torah. And, to give you an example, the story of the binding of Isaac. Okay, so somewhat familiar, right? So in rabbinic tradition, every Jewish New Year, which is called Rosh Hashanah, which are the high holidays that come up soon, every Jewish New Year, that is the part of the Torah that's read. Right? So there's a lot of stuff in Torah. Right? So for the rabbinic tradition to say, this is what Jews are going to read, doesn't matter, Reform, Orthodox, Conservative, you're going to read this story every year. Right? And some people might understand that story as, because you need to remember what a great model of faith Abraham was, that he was even willing to sacrifice his son. Okay? Someone else may be like, can I believe in a God that would ask Abraham to do that? Right? And what kind of father, what kind of parent is Abraham ready to do that? Right? So there's a lot of, and in that process, trying to figure out again, so who is God? So I don't have a kind of an answer like this is who God is. God's very involved. It's kind of a both end. He's very immanent and involved in life in the world, but also very transcendent, right? And when you have things that come up, I can go back to the Holocaust, but even if I go back to October 7th, which I'm guessing is a date that you kind of have a reference point to from 2023.
Yeah.
Then obviously that brings up questions like, where was God? How did God let this happen? Right? But it's a constant grapple, yes, with who is God and what is our relationship with God.
Okay. Yeah, I
Have you
appreciate that.
guys seen Fiddler on the Roof?
I have not.
I've seen parts.
Okay,
Okay.
Is that a
definitely.
movie?
What's that? It is a movie. It was originally a play,
Mm-hmm.
but it's also a movie, and I highly recommend seeing that because the context is Eastern Europe in the late 1800s, where there's a lot of attacks against Jews, and ultimately they have to leave. And some of them go to what was then called Palestine, having nothing to do with Palestinians, but that was what Rome back in the day called that. But went to the Holy Land, and then a lot of people immigrated to the United States as well in the late 1800s. But on that backdrop, you see this milkman, Tevye, right, who's pushing his milk cart around all day. And he's in this ongoing conversation with God. That's like a very Jewish thing, right? As opposed to you need to go to synagogue to talk to God, right? Synagogue, like church, and I don't know where the word church comes from, but in Hebrew, the word for church and synagogue are very close because they have to do with gathering. Right? So, so it's this ongoing conversation and relationship with God. And very much, in addition to we needing God and wanting to have a relationship with God, God wanting to have relationship with us as well. Something else I would put out there for kind of for you to reflect on is that Christians, not all Christians, but a lot of Christians talk about God a lot. Right? We pray to God a lot. So what I noticed in my chaplaincy training that began in the early 2000s was that, well, you guys talk a lot more about God than we do, right? Like, what's your theology? What culturally, Jews don't tend to do that a lot. Not that no one writes about that stuff, and Rabbi Heschel certainly did and does, and Reform and Orthodox and conservative rabbis have written and write about theology. But your average Jewish person doesn't talk a lot about God, but talks a lot to God in prayer.
Okay, so it's a lot less about like who he is and more about like how can we have like that personal,
Yeah.
at least a relationship with him.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then, and this could be a very
And
basic.
I'm just
Yes.
going to say one other thing, because this is going to come up in the high holidays in liturgy. One of the greatest hits of Jewish prayer is something called Avinu Malkeinu. And Avinu means our father, our parent, and Malkeinu means our king. So right in that prayer is this grappling with the question that you've been underlining, who is God? You know, God can be like a parent, but God can also be more distant, like a king or a ruler that doesn't necessarily have this family connection feeling. And you know, I would say God can be more in question. Can God be both or all of that? And it kind of depends on what's going on in any particular time.
Okay, and then I'm assuming you would confirm with the idea that God is omnipotent, all-powerful, all-present, and then all-knowing. I know these are kind of like the Christian spiritual, like the ideas that we know about God.
Yeah, you know, a lot of Jewish people would say yes to that. I'm going to use another word that is much more my theology, which is that God is omnibeneficent. Okay. Rabbi Brad Artson, who's a rabbi in California and the dean of a rabbinical school, he talks about God being that. Right? So you talk about all powerful, all knowing, and all present. Yes, I resonate with the all present. I would say more kind of like originally and theoretically all powerful, but that God limits God's power, right? Or at some point, maybe let's say after creation, to allow for this partnership. That God at this point, I think this is God's decision, right? That this world works in a partnership between human beings and God. And therefore, I, God, am no longer all powerful. Right? I think one of the expressions of that is saying I'm never going to destroy the world. I could, but I made that covenant with humanity. And so there's a limitation that God imposed on God's self in terms of power. And the all-knowing, for me, yes, all-knowing in terms of aware, but not all-knowing in terms of what's going to be.
Okay.
That a lot of Jewish people grapple with this because there's clearly in Jewish tradition a free will, but then that clashes with that how is it free will if God knows everything? But where that teaching comes from, there's a misunderstanding of the Hebrew. And I think the original Hebrew intent was to say God sees everything, right? But meaning everything that's going on, but doesn't know what you're going to do, you know, next week when you make this decision, that decision, or next year or so forth. So not in that sense, all known.
Okay, awesome.
Is that like, you said he lessens his power, he removed his,
It's like God.
wait, like how, like where would it go? Where would his power, like he takes it away from himself, like how?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, it's not, if you're considering this idea for the first time, this is not like a 2 + 2 = 4.
Yeah.
And so don't at all kind of feel like, why am I not getting this? He just said something, he made it sound pretty simple. It has to do, for example, from a Jewish mystical perspective, with God's presence is so, it's limitless. Right?
Mhm.
It, as the Torah says, the scripture says, it fills everything. Okay? But if it fills everything, and there's only space for God, who's limitless, then how is there space for us, or the rest of the world, or nature, and so forth? So the idea, and I don't think it's just a Jewish mystical idea, but definitely that's where I know
Yeah.
it from. And the Christian mystics, they're Gnostics. Have you heard of
Mystics? What is that like?
Yeah, so actually, there is Christianity outside of the Gnostic section of like Christianity from our side of the aisle that believe in what you're speaking to. It fails me to be able to like memorize what their argument is, but this is an argument that I heard recently, and I will say that the way that they phrased it, it does have some validity. And I wish that I could remember how they said it, but there is a Christian side that would argue for the exact same thing.
Yeah, so we call it, so yeah, this isn't particularly, this is not connected specifically with Jesus, for example, or something that's particularly Christian. It's more of an understanding, both spiritually and physically, in terms of physics, that God had to restrict God's self. We call that in Hebrew tzimtzum, in order to make room for us in the world. And that because there is the world with more than just God in it, that's kind of like the proof, right?
Yeah.
Not scientifically, but like the logical, so that means God, who is otherwise would fill everything, has decided and taken upon God's self to restrict God's self to make space for us and the rest of the world. And that's kind of
But
this
yeah.
like
I was just
God
thinking,
side.
like, if God's like so great and vast and has all this power, then like, what would limit him to create space and not have to lessen his power, or what limits him to not filling like all of this space, but also him being so great he can have space for us too in the world and like creation.
Yeah, I think probably it goes back to like, well, how would that actually happen? I mean, you could say, it doesn't matter, God will make it happen, okay? Like, for example, in a whole different context, but with respect to organ donation, organ transplants, right? So, which Judaism is very much in support of, because almost more important than anything else is saving a life. Okay? And so, as much as important as keeping kosher could be, and you probably are aware enough to a certain extent that like eating a bacon double cheeseburger would not be kosher. Okay? But there would be no question if someone has a gun to your head and said, you either eat that bacon double cheeseburger or I'm going to shoot you, then you eat the bacon double cheeseburger, right? Because you're saving your life, or the same thing. Because, I'm going to shoot you. If I don't eat the thing, then you eat it. Right?
Yeah.
So life has a huge level of importance. Like in Deuteronomy, choose life. That's a big deal. So some people will say resurrection for Jews will come in the Messianic era, which hasn't happened yet. So when that happens, if you believe in that, right, then people would say that's why Jews can't do that, because then how are you going to be resurrected without the heart that you donated to you, right?
Yeah.
Because you needed it. My theology says God has figured out enough things. God will figure out how to resurrect you without your heart, right? Like it's like interesting point, but more important to save his life now with your heart, since you're already whatever, or with your liver, or whatever the situation is. So, but it's a great question.
So like you're saying, like the Jewish religion stresses like now and not wondering what is to come.
Great, yes, I'm glad you got that somehow out of what I've said.
Yeah, that's how it's kind of.
That is very. It's much more. People would say, and I agree with it, that Judaism is much more a religion of deed than creed. It's like what you do here and now in this world.
Like doing what you know and can understand, and not trying to get caught up in all what you can't understand.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
exactly.
So you'll have a lot less emphasis on salvation versus like your modern day evangelical
Yeah.
Christian.
Yeah, salvation is not, I mean, yeah, salvation basically is in the context of when the Messiah comes. And because it's not that there's an anti-Jesus bent in Judaism. It is a different theological understanding in the sense that Jesus was not the Messiah and couldn't have been the Messiah. But again, and I appreciate how you introduced that. I don't mean any disrespect by saying that. I'm saying to Jews, right? Understanding other people could say, I'm not saying that's the fact, you know.
Yeah.
So, but from a Jewish perspective, the Messiah hasn't come yet, and we know that because part of how we'll know in these messianic times is there'll be peace on earth, which there clearly is not. So, so from that perspective, Jesus was a rabbi, was a teacher, and as my rabbi growing up said and wrote about this, that he said, what did Jews have to learn from Jesus is that at a time, in the first century more or less, right, at a time when status in the Jewish community came from having wealth and came from having learning, right, education, Jesus asked the question, well, what if you don't have either? Then what? We just don't care about those people, or we forget about those people, or we shit on those people, or whatever. And so my rabbi growing up would say that's what Jews have to learn from Jesus, which is a big deal, right? Especially when you're growing up as a Jewish kid and you're not sure, like, who is? I know he's really important to that group of people, and we believe differently. So where is that? Leaves me kind of helping string popcorn with my friend Billy in the neighborhood to put on their Christmas tree, without any idea of what Christmas is and why a tree and whatever. But I understand they got this holiday, and then him coming across the street and being with us when we're lighting the Hanukkah candles. And I mean, we're little kids, right? So,
Yeah.
but yeah.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate you shedding light on that because I mean, obviously, we come from like the same background of like the tribes of Judah. Like we have that same lineage, but then whenever we get to Jesus, it just like it varies so differently. But I mean, this is something that we all have to kind of reconcile, especially for like being Christians, knowing why we believe what we believe, and like if this is truth, like if this is truly what God is leading us to. So I definitely appreciate you kind of like shedding light on why y'all believe what y'all believe, and then from the Christian perspective of why we believe what we believe. It's far too easy. I think all of us come from a Christian home. So like we grew up Christian, and then chances are we're going to be Christian, and sure enough we are. So I definitely appreciate hearing the other side of like what y'all have to say about the Messiah. But moving on.
Yeah.
Moving on to like man. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So the idea of man, obviously, the question arises of Adam and Eve. Do you believe that Adam and Eve were historical figures? And then do you believe that they brought original sin? And I'll use kind of Christian terms from our understanding, and you can bring your understanding into this. But original sin, that we're all wretched beings, that we're separated from God, and now because we're separated from God, we need to be reconciled by the Messiah. Would those kind of be ideas that you would share with us, or?
No, I mean, I would say to use that expression of original sin from the story in the garden, we would say the original sin was separating knowledge from life. That would be kind of my understanding of what the eating of the fruit and what the sin was. Now, it's not that there are not different Christian takings on this too. For Jews, which is a very Paul Tillich thing too, who is a Christian theologian. For Jews, the word sin, literally, and the idea is about a gap. It's a gap between where we want to be and where we are. So the word actually comes from the context of archery. So the sin is, you know where the bullseye is, right? The sin is the distance between, no one's hitting bullseyes all the time. So, you might be on the edge of the target, you might be nowhere near the target, but that's that gap. And Tillich will talk about this in the connection of the gap between the distance between us and God. That's where sin is. So it's not so much a particular thing you did that you're, for lack of a better word, screwed for because you did it. It's a matter of taking kind of account of you just shot 10 arrows if you've ever done archery, right? And then you go and collect them and you're like, oh, this one over there, oh, well, this one wasn't bad. And then coming back and re-aiming and trying to get closer to the mark. There's a mark. And so a lot of the high holidays in the fall for Jews are about that.
Okay.
Kind of like refocusing on, okay, it's been a year, right? How'd I do over the year? Right? And where's the mark? And where am I off? And where do I need to try to get closer to it? So the story in the garden has a lot to do with growth and development and relationship with, one of the most important things about the beginning of the Torah is God asking the question, Adam, where are you? That question is key, both in terms of kind of underlining that questions are the key to growth and development, not answers. So, and God's modeling it by asking that first question. And of course, God knows where Adam is, so it's not a geographical, like which tree are you hiding behind. It's really this more of like, where are you with respect to where you want to be and what I want you, and so it's a lot deeper than that. And kind of then giving that question and saying, you need to ask yourself this question: where am I?
So could you consider it kind of like scales? Like you have the bad that you do, the good that you do,
Yeah.
and like as long as your good outweighs the bad, then you're standing right before God. Would that kind of like be a general?
That is a major image on the Jewish New Year and the Day of Atonement is that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then throughout the Jewish life of a Jewish person, they would be constantly evaluating these scales, seeing where they land, and then trying to ensure that the good always outweighs the bad. Okay, awesome. Yeah, that definitely sums up some stuff.
And I would say yes, always outweighs the bad, and that the bad, quote unquote, or let's say what's not life-giving or what's not contributing to relationship is lessening.
Okay.
Not that it's there at all. It's that that's built into being human, but exercising the agency to do something about it. And so, for example, the whole issue of forgiveness and repentance, in addition to asking for forgiveness, is that when you're in that situation again, doing something different. That's the completion of the process. Because if you end up doing the same thing again, then you haven't really succeeded.
Okay.
What determines what's bad, and who determines like you have two different people and they both say like I've done good, and you're like, well, I looked at your life and it didn't look good, but then it's like I looked at your life and it didn't look good, but we're both saying we're good. So it's like, how do you determine if you're good? Like when you talk about the yearly or like looking back, I don't know.
Kind of, so we call that a spiritual accounting that you're meant to do. So first of all, one way to think about it is there are 613 commandments in the Torah, right? So 10 are probably the most well known, even though in Hebrew they're not called the 10 Commandments, and they're not even all commandments.
Yeah.
So I don't even know where that term came from originally. But there are standards like those 10 and 613, so 603 other ones, right, that appear in the Torah. And so about half, a little more than half, have to do with the temple and sacrifices and stuff like that, which is not relevant today. So now you're down to 200 whatever. And you're looking at, like, am I observing these? And there's a difference between those, we call them mitzvot, commandments, that are between us and God, and between us and fellow human beings. So those are in general, those are the standards, as opposed to, let's say, how much money did I make this year, something like that.
Yeah.
Right? And a big deal, and you referenced Isaiah 53 earlier. So this will just kind of give you a sense of a different culture. In general, Jews don't know those references. Okay? I mean, they know the book of Isaiah and Isaiah as a prophet, but they don't know 53. Okay? So, you'd have to tell me, like, okay, this is the part that talks about blah, blah, blah. Because in general, the Jewish experience with Scripture is from week to week, we're reading an ongoing narrative from the beginning of the book of Genesis through the end of the book of Deuteronomy. And every year we start it again. So it's kind of like, where are we in the story? Okay? Last week was a whole Torah portion about setting up a justice system. Okay, and how important it is to pursue justice, and how easy it is through bribery and other means to pervert justice. And so you need to have judges, and how are they qualified, and all that kind of stuff. That was last week. And then, or this week, coming up to the Torah portion that has to do with going out to war. And so you kind of have this awareness of where were we last week in the story, where are we this week, and where are we going to be next week, as opposed to, Leviticus whatever, and knowing what is that, right? Well, where is it in the story is really kind of the Jewish question. So so it feels different culturally, because Christians tend to be much more familiar with and comfortable with, well, it's this chapter, this verse. But on the Day of Atonement, in every synagogue, they're going to read in English and or Hebrew these words from Isaiah, that through whom God spoke and said, I don't need your fast. All these people are fasting for the Day of Atonement. That's a big deal. It's like, Christians who come to synagogue on Easter and Christmas, right? I mean, this is that time for Jews. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, these are the big ones. So a lot of people are going to fast, and they don't do much the rest of the year, but they're going to fast, and they're going to be in synagogue, and they're going to hear the words that saying, I don't need your fast. What I need you to do is to be good to one another. I need you to help people who need help. I don't need you to screw people in business during the week and then come to synagogue and say, oh, forgive me. That's one of the things, for example, that sticks out to me about Isaiah.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And then
I probably got one more minute, so I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Because I know we probably got more to talk about, and we could spend more time.
Well, you hit on the Messiah part, so that was actually perfect. And then just real quick, are we created in the image of God? Like, I know that the Genesis kind of speaks to that. Do you kind of believe that we are made in the image of God, and have we kind of grown that? Are we is a sinner still created in the image of God, even though they're from our perspective separated? Or what do you believe on us being the image of God? Is there a way to bear that image stronger?
I believe that from a biblical perspective, there is no argument that could possibly be made, if you believe in biblical scripture, that we're not created in the image of God. That's very clear. What that means, you can interpret in different ways, but every human being is created in the image of God, for sure. And I believe that with all my heart and soul. And so any kind of bigotry and discrimination is an affront. It's a direct affront to that, I wouldn't say historical fact or scientific fact, but let's say theological fact / belief that we're all created in the image of God. And so, for example, the book of Psalms, right? 150 poems. Right?
Yeah.
So Psalm 27 is known in our circles as the penitential psalm. So it's the one out of 150 possible choices, the one that was chosen to say, this is the psalm that's going to accompany you for a month leading up to the Jewish New Year, right? And we're in that month, right? And I actually forgot to bring
27, is that the one where it's you said, seek my face, the face of
Yeah.
God I see?
Yeah. Starts out saying,
It's when my mother and father forsake me.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's impressive.
It's
Yeah,
that's one of my
impressive.
favorites. It's just
That's
it's
impressive. So every day we say that song and kind of meditate on what it means and how it's supposed to help us get ready for this season.
Mm-hmm.
So what was I singing there? It has to do with what we were just talking about, creating an image of God. So there's a verse in the middle that says, one thing I ask from God is to sit in the house of the Lord all the days of my life. Okay? And there's a rabbinic commentary on that says, okay, that you don't have to take that literally as you are going to sit in this place, right? Let's say the temple in Jerusalem. But really, if you look at the Hebrew supports this, that God is sitting in you, that you are going to be a house of God, right? By virtue of having been created in the image of God, that you should embody that in how you live. So yes, everyone's created in the image of God, not everyone lives into that.
Okay.
Right? So for example, when I have Christian chaplaincy students, right, who are coming from an evangelical background and who really, are excited and passionate and want to share the good news, right, which butts up against medical ethics, because you're walking into someone's room who, first of all, may not be Christian at all, right? So is that even going to be good for them, right? And on the other hand, you're Christian, right? So it's not like you're supposed to forget about who you are. So the consultation would be, could you embody Jesus, right? Could you imagine less getting someone to say a certain formula of words, like I accept Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior, that's your job, and more that your job is to model this, I'll say person, but I know it's more than a person, right, for you. To model Jesus as a follower of Jesus, right? Could you be okay with that? Right? And saying, and a lot of Christian people, and you guys know there are a lot of different Christian perspectives, and there's a big spectrum there, right? So some people will be like, yeah, no problem, I can do that. Somebody else is like, no way. I mean, I gotta bring Jesus up. I gotta save you. I gotta save you, Jonathan, because I love you. I don't want you to go to hell. And I'm like, I'm offended that you think I'm going to hell because I don't, but it's good to have those conversations, because it can kind of help. But what I've seen in some of my Christian students is an expanding of their understanding, which goes back to being created in the image of God, that I can embody Jesus by how I am in this patient's room with them. Maybe even more than getting, than saying a certain formula of words or getting them to say a certain formula of words. So for me, that's what it comes back to. It's everyone is created in the image of God. And then the question is, how do we live into that?
Okay. So real quick, like your approach to, I guess, evangelism, but y'all might use other words for it, isn't so much of like, if I say these specific words, then they'll be saved. More of, it's less of that and more of, if I live a godly life, they'll see my example and then they'll wish to follow in suit of that. And then that's kind of like, that's a great approach.
Yeah, it's definitely that, but it's also not even with the necessary following of then they will. Okay. It's like, this is my responsibility and obligation, and my covenant with God is to act in this way. Hopefully that's helpful, healing, loving for other people. What they do with that, not my job. Right? I'm leaving that in God's hands. So a lot of times when I'm having a conversation with someone who wants to become Jewish, I want them to know that there is nothing in Jewish tradition that believes that God will be happier if you're Jewish, or you will be saved from something if you're Jewish, or the Messiah will come faster if you become Jewish. I'd say, no, that doesn't mean I don't want you to become Jewish, or I won't welcome you if that's what you're interested in, but I want you to understand that what Judaism is concerned about is everyone being a good person, given who they are and where they're coming from. Nothing bad about being Christian or Muslim or nothing, right? In terms of faith tradition, it's really about how you act in this life towards yourself, towards other people. And you mentioned before, there is such a thing as becoming Jewish, right? So people can convert and become Jewish, but it doesn't go along with a theology that makes a difference to God.
Okay. And then this could be like a very rudimentary question, but like, do you have to be Jewish to be able to make it into, like, be saved?
No. First of all, there is no such thing as being saved.
Okay.
From the Jewish perspective.
Y'all understand, like, eternity and, like, because I know obviously we come from a Christian perspective, right. So like, can you shed light on like eternity? Like, we have two options from a Christian perspective, obviously either hell or heaven. Right. That's how we understand it. Do y'all believe in like?
So remind me. There's a quote in what you all refer to as the New Testament about where there, I know. So, so one of my mentors, who's a Christian pastor, can say, hell is where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth.
Yes, sir.
Oh,
Okay?
math? Is that Matthew?
Yeah, I think it
Or
is.
Jesus telling them?
Yes.
So it's not so much that it's literal death, but that's what it feels like. The fire and burn in hell type of stuff comes from Dante's Inferno and is kind of more of a Catholic kind of image of what that is. The word for hell in Hebrew is actually, we were talking about Israel before, so one time when you're visiting, there's outside of the old city, there is a valley. And in that valley, which is called the Valley of Hinnom, right? And if you look this up in an English dictionary, you'll see Gehenna, okay, or Gehenna, is hell. But what happened there is the Canaanites would sacrifice their children to a god called Moloch, right? Because their theology was this pleased this god to have them, sacrifice their children in the fire pit in this valley. And that kind of became like the expression of, oh, that's hell. Okay? But not like you're going to hell because of what you did.
Okay.
So there is a theological understanding in rabbinic tradition that there is a world to come. And so when people say, like, how do we make sense of this? Right? Like Job seems to be such a good guy, and he's going through such hell on earth. And then this guy, who's clearly a terrible human being based on what we know of what he or she does, they seem to be doing great, right? Like where's the justice? We're kind of in the book of Jonah realm now, right? Like this mercy, justice, all that kind of stuff. So that's where we grapple with this in terms of, is it going to make a difference? But all this, as far as Jews are concerned, no one knows because no one has been and come back.
Okay.
Right? So what is this world to come? What happens after you die? Who knows? We have beliefs about it, but those of us, at least I always try to remind people that these are not facts. These are not proven things. You also can't disprove them, right? But you can't, it's not a laboratory of souls that experiments get done on. The question is, if you have this belief, does it add meaning to your life? Right? So if you believe that something comes after, and it's really what dies is your body physically, but that your spirit lives on, to a lot of people, that brings meaning, and comfort, both thinking about their own mortality and also when their loved one dies, even though, of course, you still feel the pain of not having someone right next to you the way they used to be. But,
Yeah, so y'all kind of like wonder, I'm sorry, Cody, I'll let you ask that. This is just like a clarifying thing. Y'all believe we'll do as best as we can before God on this side of eternity, and then that way God will make it right whenever we get to the other side. That's kind of y'all's.
There is a belief in that.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a pretty, I would say, mainstream belief that this world is not the end.
Okay.
But at the same time, as you were kind of focusing in before, Cody, but the emphasis is on living our lives here and now.
Yeah. I was just gonna ask, like, I don't know if you said it, but so your belief is like, this is how I live, and I believe I'm supposed to live my life like in Judaism, but other people's religions is their way, and we're all, like, I don't know. But since you guys don't believe in like to come, like the heaven or hell, so it's like, I don't know how to explain it. I was just thinking of like, so everyone's religion is okay to you, like them living it out, and I guess.
I would say yes, with the caveat that, for example, a lot of, are you familiar with the word anti-Semitism? Yes. A lot of Jew hatred.
Oh yeah.
Has been generated through and by the church. That's hard. It doesn't mean I hold you responsible for that. But, I'm looking back and saying, look, the people who perpetrated the Holocaust were going to church every week. The Pope knew what was going on and didn't do what I wish he would have tried to do more. Not, not that he could tell Hitler what to do, but so, and from a fundamental belief, I mean, this is, in the roots, and for, people ask me, like, why do people hate the Jews?
Yeah.
You know, if you gather a group of Christians in a particular context, in Eastern Europe, and you whip them up on Easter and tell them that the Jews killed Jesus, right? And they happen to be drinking a lot too, because it's a holiday, they're going to go out and start attacking Jews. So that is by way of saying, okay, and at the moment you see this in a particular part of the Muslim world, okay, like just kill all the Jews.
Yeah.
So to what you're wondering about, like, you're okay with anything?
Yeah.
Yeah, as long as you're not doing harm to other people. I don't have a problem with people's beliefs that are different than my beliefs when they take people to certain places. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, there was in 1987, I remember it. There was a fanatic Jewish guy in the city of Hebron in Israel, who walked into a mosque on the holiday of Purim. It's basically the book of Esther on the Bible. Yeah. And the context in the book of Purim is that Haman, who's this evil guy, who wants to kill all the Jews and gets the king's permission to do it.
Yeah.
And then when Esther, pleads with the king, and the king, the rules are, I can't take that back, because he already stamped it with his ring.
Yeah.
But I could make another decree that the Jews can defend themselves.
Yeah.
Okay? So then, in the end of the book, which is much less playful and much more bloody than the beginning of the book, is the day comes. Right? Purim literally means lots. Okay, because there was a lottery on when are we going to exterminate the Jews. Right? So we'll pick up. We're going to do it on this day. That's why it's the name of that holiday. And when they come to kill the Jews, right, the Jews defend themselves and kill them. Okay? So this guy on that day walks into a mosque and with a machine gun and just mows people down who are praying. Okay? I mean, that is not just not okay. That, in my humble opinion, obviously he thought differently because he was killed, but would be abhorrent to God. Yeah.
So then the illustration that we were given in class was like we're looking at a mountain. You have all of humanity back here, and we're trying to get to the top of the mountain. We don't know what's up there, but we know that something's up there. That's our goal. And there's like roads. There's the road that Islam gives. There's the road that Judaism gives. There's the road that Christianity gives. But they all lead to the top. Is that kind of your understanding of eternity?
It's interesting. I've never heard that. And of course, the top of the mountain is reminiscent of Mount Sinai and Revelation and receiving the Torah and so forth. But where I go with that image is when they all get to the top and they realize that the point is the bottom. Okay? But from a Jewish perspective, the point of getting to the top was receiving this instruction that we call the Torah, which means instruction, right? About how to live down there, not how to live up here. We're not living on top of the mountain, right? So we can take a break, we can get some good consultation, we can have holy moments there, but life is at the foot of the mountain, let's say, in this case. And the question is, what gets you there? Right? So one in the book that I didn't bring here, but if I would have seen it, I would have grabbed that one. It's a short book called 9 Questions People Ask About Judaism. Maybe with this we'll finish that for now. One of those questions is about keeping kosher. And it comes up like, what is it about not eating this, yes, eating that? And this rabbi's response, which I loved, was like, he said, this is all about trying to help you develop an ethical code in living, right? So he said, so there are some people like Mozart who could just sit at a piano and go, okay? You don't even need a lesson. But not most people. Right? Most people need to practice, okay? And this is the way to practice. And he said it's like a stoplight. He said this is a busy intersection here. If there's no stoplight, right, there's going to be a problem. Whether red means stop and green means go is a lot less important. The point is we need a system here to know what to do, because you got people coming from different directions, and if they're, so we can get hung up on, well, why red is stop and green is go, but that's really not the main issue, right? So it's really about these different religious traditions. How good of a job do they do at helping us practice so that we become better people and live good lives, right? And if they do that, then they're doing their, they're doing their
due
doing their
diligence.
jobs. Yeah. And I would say, and this might be obvious, but I'll just make the obvious explicit, that whenever you're talking about Judaism, you always have a built-in challenge from a Christian perspective, because Judaism is both a religion and a people. Right? So, for example, I work in hospitals a lot as a chaplain. So when someone comes into the hospital and they say, well, do you have any kind of faith tradition? And they say Jewish, right? So they're not Christian or Muslim or Buddhist because they said Jewish. But that Jewish person could very much be a Jewish person who just identified as Jewish and say, I don't believe in God, I don't keep kosher, I never go to synagogue, right? And I feel strongly Jewish, right? But if you put that person next to someone here that says, who may or may not be a Christian, okay, you tell me. But the person that says, I don't believe in Jesus, I never go to church, okay, and I don't observe any of the Christian religion, but I feel strongly Christian. It's hard to make sense of that, right? What's left? I mean, you could say, but I grew up, celebrating Christmas, so I love having the Christmas tree and that's one other thing. But kind of the point I'm trying to make is, for Jews, there would be a lot left. There's culture, there's language, there's food, there's art, there's history, there's Israel. There's all this other stuff that's not necessarily religious, right? That's there. That's hard to come to terms with when we're looking at just the religion. Because we can say Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, let's say, for example, and compare and contrast them. But with Jews, there's something else going on, which is this peoplehood, kind of ethnic, cultural thing that is connected to religion, but it's not the same as, right? And in any particular Jewish person might not express itself that way.
And so that would be considered, was that secular Judaism, kind of that those people that associate with Judaism but practice no tradition are only Jews from birth?
I would say it this way, and it's very interesting, so I'm going to bring an explanation for this from Russian, okay? But it's more than Russian, it's from the Soviet Union. So, you've heard of the Soviet Union, right? It was communist, and one of the big things about communism in the Soviet system anyway was not real big on religion, okay? But in people's internal passports, which was their identity card, there was always a line number 5, which was your nationality. Because there were a lot of different nationalities living in the Soviet Union. So it could be written there, Russian, Ukrainian, Kazakh, Uzbek, Tartar, Belarusian, blah, 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 okay? Jew. Wouldn't be written there Christian. Would not be written there Muslim. Wouldn't be written there Buddhist, right? But Jew. Because Jewish was seen as a different nationality. And that, by the way, is how they discriminated against Jews, because whenever you came to sign up for studies or to show up for a job, you always had to show this thing. They could say, sorry, we don't have any work available. So, so I use that because they had 2 different words in Russian for Judaism, which sounds like Judaism, right? Judaism. But then they had another word which is Yevrestva, which is Jewishness. So that, kind of bringing that example, because you could call it secular Judaism, right? But it's not Judaism in the sense of connected to religion and religious observance, because by virtue of being secular, that person is already not connected to religious observance, right? So it's not really Judaism, right? But it's being Jewish, right? And in English, we don't have those two different, I mean, we can say Jewishness and Judaism, but usually we kind of use Judaism. But it's a challenge to kind of grasp it, because there are people, right, who are secular, yet they're connected Jewishly. So what,
So yeah, so you're saying like it goes deeper than just religion.
right,
Yeah.
yeah, definitely, definitely. And it's also interesting in that respect, even though to many of us Jesus is foreign, because we haven't learned about Jesus, and we know, okay, well, that's a Christian thing, and then there's this, well, supposedly we killed Jesus, even though we really didn't kill Jesus. So, it's just kind of uncomfortable, and you don't really get it, and unless you have a rabbi like I had, who says like, no, it's not a matter of is Jesus real or not. You put aside the messianic thing, because we can just have a different perspective on that. But what Jesus was teaching is important, and here is why, type of a thing. But also, to know that, he was Jewish. Right? That's, a little bit more than interesting, because then you're like, well, that's, right? So how does that work? And you guys probably know, I mean, there are still, I'm guessing not at your seminary, but there are still people who, when I say that, just bringing it up, just kind of so we're on the same page, are like, what are you talking about? He was Christian. And
Really?
kind of like, and I don't want to be offensive, and you're like, there wasn't Christian, right, yet, right? So, or as Reverend Harper would tell me, John, he said, Jonathan, you have to, all your students, sometimes you need to remind them that what Jesus had was the Torah. Okay? Jesus didn't have the New Testament, right? So, not that that's right or wrong, but just like, let's to put things into perspective. So, anyway, you guys, fascinating conversation.
Well,
And
I really appreciate it.
you're welcome. If anything else comes up, don't hesitate to reach out. I might be like, we were talking about something and this wasn't clear or whatever.
Sure, yeah, we're gonna go through the recording, but we're gonna try not to bother you too much. But I mean, yeah,
Don't worry about it.
we really appreciate your generosity to have us here today.
You are very welcome. And since we're in the synagogue, have you ever seen it fall?
No, sir.
So